In Istanbul, Turkey's diplomatic stage has once again become a centre of gravity for regional negotiation. Inside the ornate halls of the Foreign Ministry, the nation's top diplomat, Hakan Fidan, stood before a row of microphones and a crowded press gallery, declaring that Israel must stop its regular violations of the US, brokered ceasefire in Gaza and allow humanitarian aid to reach those most in need. His words carried urgency not only for the besieged families of Gaza, but for the credibility of international diplomacy itself. Foreign ministers from across the Arab and Muslim world had gathered in Istanbul that morning, seeking a common strategy for what they now call the day after Gaza, representing Jordan, Pakistan, Indonesia, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey itself. They arrived against a backdrop of deepening humanitarian crisis and growing frustration over Israel's continued airstrikes and border restrictions. Egypt had also been on the attendance list. But as Fidan explained, scheduling conflicts prevented its participation this time. Still, the symbolic weight of the meeting remained clear. The Muslim world was attempting to coordinate a political, humanitarian and potentially military response under the auspices of the United Nations. In his statement, Hakan Fidan said countries were still working on a UN mandate for an international stabilization force in Gaza, one that could help preserve a fragile truce, protect civilians, and facilitate the delivery of aid. Participation, he emphasized, would depend entirely on how the Security Council defines that mandate. The issue of Palestine, he said, and its definition that has been accepted and adapted must not change. In the end, we are talking about the geography of 1,967 borders, the state of Palestine, with a two-state solution to be implemented. He went on to note that this definition is enshrined in international law.
Israel never agreed
On this, he said, and it never had any intention to approve it. But the international society has based its opinion on this understanding, and this is our perspective. Those remarks resonated across the hall, a mixture of frustration and principle, reaffirming that Ankara will resist any effort to redefine Palestinian sovereignty under the guise of post-war administration. Correspondent Sinem Kasolu, reporting live from the Istanbul venue, described the gathering as one of urgency more than optimism. According to her, the ministers were revisiting commitments made during earlier meetings, including the summit with US President Donald Trump in New York and the Cairo discussions that followed. What are we up to? Fidan had asked rhetorically. How far have we been able to reach? The answer, Kasolu noted, seemed painfully clear: not far enough. As Fidan put it, the ceasefire remains dangerously fragile. He accused Israel of violating its terms and obstructing humanitarian deliveries, saying aid convoys and medical supplies were still being blocked at border crossings. The agreed-upon plan must be honoured, he said. Humanitarian and medical aid must reach the Gazan people. His tone was firm but measured, a diplomatic warning to both Israel and its allies that continued obstruction could unravel what little stability the truce had achieved. When asked about the proposed international stabilization force, Kasolu explained that nothing concrete had yet been decided. The attending countries are waiting for the UN Security Council to define the exact terms, its size, command structure, and operational boundaries. Fidan, representing all participating nations, made it clear that every government involved wants to help, but that, as he put it, the definition has to be clear. Turkey, he reminded reporters, stands ready to send troops if called upon, a pledge that instantly revived an old debate. Israel's defense minister has already stated that Turkish soldiers should never take part in any Gaza peacekeeping or monitoring mission. That declaration exposes the deeper mistrust that continues to haunt Turkish-Israeli relations. Yet Ankara insists its intentions are purely humanitarian and stabilizing. As Kasolu pointed out, other regional powers, Jordan, Pakistan and Egypt, have signalled similar willingness, but will wait for the UN's formal definition before committing forces. This complex dynamic underscores the geopolitical fault lines running beneath the Gaza question. Turkey's willingness to deploy troops is significant, both symbolically and militarily. But for Israel, the prospect of a Turkish-led contingent evokes fears of bias and political leverage. At the same time, Arab states insist that any stabilization mission must reinforce Palestinian sovereignty, not replace it. For Ankara, the equation is simple. Gaza must be governed by Palestinians, defended by international legitimacy, and rebuilt through cooperation, not control. To understand the wider implications, analysts turn to Miroslav Zafirov, former senior political advisor to the UN Special Coordinator's Office for the Middle East peace process, speaking from Abu Dhabi. Above all, he said, this conference shows the intention of key countries that have decided to enter the scene of this crisis in Gaza, eager to offer a formula for getting out of the cycle we've witnessed for the last 2 years. But Zafirov cautioned that one crucial element remains missing: legitimacy. Whatever ceasefire takes place, he said, must have a framework rooted in international law. The International Stabilization Force is one of the key elements in the comprehensive peace plan being discussed, but it must function under very clear standards. Without legitimacy, he warned, any foreign deployment risks becoming politically unsustainable and diplomatically explosive. He explained that the next phase will involve extensive debate at the United Nations, which remains the only platform capable of granting a legitimate mandate. Although many governments have grown skeptical of the UN's effectiveness, Zafirov stressed that no alternative mechanism exists to stamp such a mission with legal authority. He referenced past examples, the post-war missions in Bosnia, in parts of Africa, and in Lebanon, noting that each had faced its own challenges, but all shared one indispensable feature: an internationally recognized mandate. As diplomats now weigh those models, the search begins for what Zafirov called the golden balance, an operational formula acceptable to both regional and international actors. Yet he acknowledged that this will not be easy. Certain countries, he noted, will attract special attention from Israeli lawmakers, particularly regarding which nations might deploy troops. Turkey, he said, is at the center of that debate, but it is not alone. Other states' participation could also prove controversial within Israel's government. Zafirov warned that all of these discussions risk missing the bigger picture. Whatever happens in Gaza, he said, will just be an exercise unless we address the larger political framework the day after. The phrase "the day after" has become shorthand for a difficult question. What comes next once the fighting stops? Will Gaza be reintegrated under the Palestinian Authority as part of a revived Oslo framework, or will it become a semi-autonomous entity separated from the West Bank and managed through temporary arrangements? If we don't have a horizon, Zafirov continued, if we don't look at the long-term picture, then any stabilization force, any ceasefire, becomes just a pause before the next eruption. His comments echoed through policy circles from Ankara to Doha, from Amman to Brussels. The core issue, he said, is not simply military but political. What governance structure will ensure that Gaza does not return to chaos once foreign troops withdraw? That question resonates deeply with Turkey's own view. Fidan's ministry argues that only a sovereign Palestinian administration can guarantee peace and legitimacy. Any international role, they say, must be temporary, transparent, and coordinated under UN supervision. For Ankara, the lesson from past conflicts is clear: imposing external control breeds resentment, and resentment breeds instability. As the Istanbul conference concluded, delegates issued a carefully worded joint statement reaffirming their commitment to humanitarian access, coordination with the United Nations, and continued diplomacy. But beneath the formal language lay unresolved tensions, disagreement over which countries will contribute forces, uncertainty over Israel's recognition of a Palestinian state, and frustration at the slow pace of aid reaching civilians. Still, one point of consensus emerged. The post-war governance of Gaza, they agreed, must be Palestinian-led, internationally supported, and anchored in law. Anything less would be a repeat of the past: fragile ceasefires without political solutions, aid corridors without sovereignty, rebuilding projects without peace. As the sun set over Istanbul's Bosphorus Strait, The day's diplomatic marathon drew to a close. Outside the conference hall, journalists packed up their cameras while convoys of black vehicles carried ministers back to their hotels. Yet the question lingered in the air: could this gathering mark the beginning of a genuine roadmap, or merely another round of talk in an endless loop of regional crises? Turkey's role may again prove decisive. Its geography and alliances place it at the crossroads of East and West, NATO and the Arab League, diplomacy and defence. Fidan's voice, measured but firm, carried the weight of that responsibility. We don't want the genocide in Gaza to start again, he warned. The statement was both plea and warning, a reminder that in this fragile truce, every violation, every blockade risks pushing Gaza back into the abyss. As the world watches, attention now shifts to New York, where diplomats will draft the UN resolution defining the international stabilization force. Each paragraph, each comma will determine who steps into Gaza, under what rules, and for how long. For the people trapped inside the Strip, those decisions could mean the difference between recovery and relapse, between fragile peace and renewed destruction. In the weeks ahead, the coming debate will test not only the resolve of the United Nations, but the credibility of every government that claims to defend international law. It will test whether humanitarian aid can flow without political interference and whether ceasefire can evolve into lasting peace. In Istanbul, the meeting has ended. The cameras are off. But for Gaza, the struggle continues, a struggle not just for survival, but for recognition, for governance, and for a future beyond war. And as Turkey's foreign minister said once more before leaving the stage, the international society must not allow Gaza to fall again into silence, into suffering, and into isolation. From Istanbul to New York, from Gaza to Geneva, that message echoes a call for unity in a region where hope has too often been buried under rubble. This is the story of a fragile ceasefire, a contested peace, and a nation's insistence that the path forward must be grounded in law, legitimacy, and humanity.